What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, you're watching TWA Motorsports, and today, see that right there? That is the rear end for the Trans Am. So we got some work to do. I've already power washed this thing. Okay, my buddy changed the gear set to a 342, made sure everything was good inside, and now I know it's a 10 bolt. It's not going to last forever, but this is what I wanted to do for now. I'm going to clean it up with some alcohol kind of on the outside, and then we are going to paint this thing with some POR 15. It's going to take me a couple passes, because kind of how I like to do it is paint maybe this much, kind of reaching over the side, flip it over, paint the other side. So basically I'm painting it 4 times, okay, in quarters. Let's say a quarter, 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 finished. All right, let's get started. So 2 coats later, this is what we've got. I still have one more coat to do, which I'll do off camera. You guys won't even know. I mean, you won't be able to tell the difference. I was gonna time lapse this, but my camera wasn't out here to do time lapse with. So our next step is we need to get the rear cover off. We need to clean that up, and we need to go together with our new part, which I'm excited to put in. The paint is dry. 2 coats. Like I said, I did it in quarters. Rear end facing down, rear end facing out, rear end facing up, rear end facing back. Basically each, I'll use some cheap brushes. Some of the bristles came off, but it looks really good. So now let's get the new cover on. So I'm gonna grab the 13 and I'm gonna back all these out, take this cover off. We're gonna do a little cleaning. Now that we got that out of place, those 13s and the cover, man, this smells terrible. These gear oil always smells terrible. But I'm going to use a little brake clean, some towels. We're going to wipe this area off, and then I'm going to go over with a brand new razor blade, scrape it. I'm going to try to scrape out so we're not dumping anything in the inside here. Same thing, I don't want to get anything in the holes if I can keep from it, or where the bolts go. But let's get it all cleaned up, ready for the new gasket. I've went over this probably 2 or 3 times, making sure I got all the old gasket material off. Not to mention the paint that I painted kind of over the ledge. I kind of like to get close and then peel the paint back, even though like these areas that are kind of stained, they won't be covered, but I like to try to clean them as best I can. So let's go grab the new gasket and the new cover. Now, this new cover that I'll list in the description down below comes with a gasket, but it's junk. I don't want to use that. So I'm using a lube blocker gasket. You guys will see it here in just 1 second. I'll get it open. But the very first thing we need to do, obviously other than open that, you should get bolts, okay, and washers. Look, one's got a spacer even. It's probably for, that's a little different than the moser one I used last. That's probably for the ones up top that had, I'll have to look into that. But the thicker ones probably, there's probably a longer bolt in there, which is good because we have to put the 2 holders in for the e-brake. Now this is pretty nice. Check that out. See the 2 longer ones? I was kind of concerned about that on the last one because they were all the same size, but that's why you have these thicker ones that go in that area. And I guess that's if you choose not to use those holders, because that's about how thick they are, but we're obviously going to use those. So let's get this gasket open. I want to show you that. The other thing we need to do is we need to back these caps off. For the bearing caps, we need to back these off as far as we possibly can. So let me go get a wrench or loosen up this jam nut, and we'll back those off. Check out this gasket. So it's got basically RTV built in between in layers, and I've had really good luck with these. This is kind of my go-to. I know they're a little more expensive than just your cheap gasket, but I will tell you guys that everybody's like, oh, use RTV. I used RTV with the same style on my green truck up there, and it's actually got a little bit of a leak. So I chose, this is kind of newer technology, I guess. I think they're relatively new to the market. I say that, they've probably been out for a few years, but when I did my green truck, I don't think this was an option, or at least I didn't know about it. So definitely worth the extra money. I think they're like 25 bucks. I'll list it in the description below, but get it lined up, and then we can grab this and start threading a couple in. I'm going to thread the ones in I know don't need that gasket, or that, sorry, the
little standoffs for the e-brake. I'll thread those in first with a washer or almost like a spacer in between. I used a 7/8 to loosen the nut. Now I'm going to back these all the way back until they stop. Like that. We just want to make sure we put those down once it's installed. We'll do that last, after we've torqued all these. Now we can line it up. Here's what's nice, they actually send you both of these, a long and a short. So you get 2 extras in case you're not running those, which is nice. But you can see that you put the washer in place and then you go in with your bolt. And I've got them snugged up, but I'm gonna go grab, I just wanted to line this up. That's why I put them in, but I'm gonna go grab this top piece. Remember there was a piece up top, it's just a piece of aluminum. And honestly guys, I'm just putting it in because it kind of protects your wiring that goes to the reluctor ring on the gears for your ABS. Even though we're not using ABS, we've deleted the ABS on this. I'm gonna keep that functional or plug it back in. Maybe down the road we put ABS back on it. I doubt it, but anyway, let me go grab that piece. You're gonna have 3 of these oddball holders, right? This is the shaped one that goes on the, I guess what would be the driver's side. This one on the passenger side. And then this one, I painted all these, that's why they're off. That one goes right here. And that holds the e-brake lines. We'll put that one on a little later. But, okay, so because I put this piece on I was talking about, I had to trim it. Okay, I trimmed this before I painted it. I learned my lesson on the last one. I painted it and then had to go back and trim it. And so because I'm using that, I put the washer that came with these bolts, so these that you see underneath, I put those underneath, and then I found a washer that fit this and put it between the 2. Okay, so there's actually 2 washers here. I don't think that's going to cause me any issues as far as standing off too far. The other thing I did that exact same thing under each of these. I found a washer that fit the top, because otherwise this would just eventually open this up and we would have issues. So let me grab the torque specs. Let's see what it is here. I think we torqued this first. 25 foot-pounds. Once we get all those torqued to 25, I will tell you I had to put a thicker washer on this because it started, I had a really thin washer on it and it started to pull. So I had to go back and put a little thicker washer on it. So just keep that in mind. But we're sturdy. So now we need to torque this down to 5 foot-pounds, okay? So basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run it down till it stops. And then I'm gonna grab my torque wrench and set it to, it's actually 60 inch-pounds, which I can set this to, which is great, or 5 foot-pounds, which I can also set this to. But we run this down until it stops. I'm gonna do that by hand, if I can get this, there we go. Run this down until it stops. Okay, it stopped. And these may not be even, so don't worry about that. Now, we're going to torque those to 5 foot-pounds. Once we get that accomplished, I'm going to hold the center and then we're going to torque the nut to 20 foot-pounds. Now that that's accomplished, use the crow's foot on this for 20 foot-pounds. I don't know how accurate it was. It should be pretty good. Let's go ahead and go grab our 13 millimeter and get this back in place. And I'm also going to grab, I guess, the brake lines probably. See if I can prop this up a little bit. I don't know the torque spec for that 13 right there, but it's in there. Now, we've got another 13 that holds our brake line, which I painted just with some Rust-Oleum. I got a 13 and it has a shaft on it like that, so it'll fit in this guy. So let me get that on there next. A couple things you need to make note of. Obviously, we need to bend our little tabs back on both sides. And then if you have the clip, this is where it clips on the rear end here. And then we can grab our wiring harness next. This wiring harness obviously plugs in by the fuel pump and all the other stuff, but first goes here. And normally it would set in this, but this is broken. I'm assuming either that was broken when I took it out or I broke it when I was washing it. Either way, it's broken. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zip tie it here, and then the other one, obviously, like I said, plugs in up by the fuel pump, but I cleaned that all off. Let's get that thing tied in place. She is coming together, guys. All right, next, I'm gonna go ahead and put the brakes on. I think the rest will happen under the car, but let's get the rotors on while it's on the stands. Probably dumb idea, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Now I had to disassemble these. You can see I painted the bolts, but I had to disassemble them. I couldn't put them all together like I took them off. So 74 foot-pounds is what's gonna happen here on these, and then 23 on the guide bolts. Like I said, use a little bit. I use blue Loctite. You can use red here, but I've never had one back off using blue. Now that we got both sides assembled, kind of cleaned up, it is ready to jack this thing up. I can't hook the brake lines up until we get the other pieces in. If you guys remember, we've got to put the lower relocation brackets in, but there's a bracket that holds the brake line that also clips around that. So I've got to have that in place first. I don't think there's any way, yeah, I know I do, because it goes through the top bolt there, which we'll see here in a second. But let me get this thing jacked up, turned around, and hopefully lifted up somewhat under the car. And I've got it repositioned under there. I need to come over to the driver's side a little bit, but we'll mess with that a little later. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do first. I think I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean those off a little bit, but I'm going to put those into place. I think because of the paint, we may have to force the issue a little bit, but if I can get that in there, make sure you put your sleeve here if you're using these, otherwise this will crush. So we'll get our sleeve up in there, followed by the bolt that holds that. Okay, so you can see the ones with sleeves on them right there. And then that bracket that holds not only our brake line, right, up here, is the reason we couldn't hook it up, but also holds this guy. So I think, honestly, it's probably easiest to go ahead, hook that bracket into your e-brake. Make sure you got your e-brakes through, your e-brake lines through the proper location. But I think it's easier to clip it in here, then fasten this on, and then put it in place, at least if I remember correctly. Now you can see how I've done this. I've got that bracket on. The sleeve is on the inside, and then this is the other bracket I was talking about that holds the brake line up front and holds the e-brake. So I hooked this on. We'll snap this in here in a minute once we get this all snug down, but I'm gonna go ahead and snug. I'm not gonna tighten it, just gonna get it snug for now. This is always, you don't wanna snug it up because the front of it has to line up with the shock, and that's always a challenge if you snug it down now. This technically could be torqued because there's no rotation on it. The bottom one will have to wait until we load the suspension. Obviously we gotta swing the lower control arm into place, but this is kind of how I put it together. So this first, then this, then go ahead and hook up this guy and then thread this through, okay? Once we get it snug, we'll snap this into place, and that'll be that side. We're gonna go duplicate that on the other side. You could also, once you get it snug, start your brake line through the opening up top. I'll show you that in a minute. You can see what I'm talking about, how that bracket comes up and holds the brake line. So I went ahead and pushed it through, knocked our clip in, and started the brake line. Make sure it threads in nice and easy. Okay, don't cross thread that thing. But got both sides assembled. So now what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and grab the panhard rod and see if I can get it started in our new bracket on the other side with our new bolt and the stock bolt on this side. Well, that went in nice and easy. You clean it off though. Anyway, I think our next step is I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can get the spring in. And the reason I wanna do that next is I wanna start to lift the rear end up and get the shock. You can see I've turned it sideways to make sure it didn't hit anything. But I'd like to turn that thing, and we want the adjustment knobs on the inside, otherwise we won't be able to get to them. And I think that's what I wanna do next. I wanna take the nut and the washer off the end of that. We'll put the springs in place, start to lift it up, and then we can turn this and hopefully get it started in this bottom pocket down here. All right, this opening, the one I said not to tighten this up because squaring this up sometimes is a pain if this is tight. Got those in and tight. Well, snug. I haven't torqued them yet. Now what I think I'm going to do is I've got the rear end obviously held in place with the panhard rod, which we don't have tight. I got the rear end in place with the shocks, but what I want to do now is I want to swing these up into place, and you can see we're a long, long ways from getting where we need to be. And the reason for that is because the rear end is kind of folding forward. So what I'm hoping to do is I'm going to gradually let the rear end down on the jack stands here on each side. And when I do that, I'm going to move my jack up to the more of the front. And so what that's going to do is hopefully roll this rear end forward and allow us to get these into place. Now remember, we adjusted these when I installed them based on the stock location. So we want to make sure that we don't upset that, because we don't want to go back and set that. I mean, we can go back and set it, but I'd rather not. That's why I set them the way I did. These things slid up into place perfect, just like I thought. So I put the jack stands, moved them, put a little pressure off them, jacked up on the front of the rear end, and like I said, that rolls it forward. So these things lined up great using the stock bolts and those. We'll adjust this later. And when I say that, I like for this to be straight when I tighten it down. So I loosened them up a little bit so I could tighten them with them straight. We'll mess with that later. I think the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and snug down the brake lines. So the ones that we hooked up that went to this bracket here. At this point, we've got the brake lines locked all in, including the one that goes from the rear end to the junction. Got those all tightened up and the clips installed. So the little push-in clips that keep the lines in. Now, if you remember, back when we parted out the other Trans Am, the pewter one, we got a brand new set of sway bars. Now this one was installed on the car that we took off. The front one back there was never actually put on the car. So the next step we're going to take is we're going to be installing this. And so I painted the factory pieces because that's what holds it on. And then obviously it comes with end links that we're going to have to install. So they go metal washer, polyurethane washer, this sandwich is on the body, then another washer on top, then the sleeve, and then obviously the exact same thing on the sway bar. But what I think I will do is I think we'll get under there first and do the hooks that hold it, put those in place and kind of get it situated. I may end up having to, I don't know, those will probably hold. I don't know, I didn't think they were wide enough, but I think they are. Get these in place and they go in the stock location on the rear end. Now it's kind of a delicate balance to put this on, especially when you're replacing all of this stuff, but I've got the axle strap over there. You can see that the brake line's bent for it. But what I've done here is I've went ahead and put both sides in place. The center of this lines up, so it's got a spot on the rear end where this kind of centers itself. But side to side, you still have some movement. So what I did was I went ahead and put my end links in up here. Just make sure that you do that right with the bushings between that and the bushings on the body up top. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to snug that up because you can see how close that is to my shock adjustment, and I've kind of centered it from side to side. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to snug these up, and that should bring this arm up or this sway bar up a little bit, kind of away from this, and then maybe I can go ahead and start to snug these down. We can go ahead and torque all of this stuff. Now as far as the end links, I jacked the rear end up a little bit to kind of load the suspension up. I tightened these down until the center stopped spinning, and actually it bottomed out the threads on this. So, and the center's not spinning, so I think we're good. The clamps though that hold that section, those go to 18 foot-pounds. And then I'm gonna go ahead and tighten the shock down as well. So the shock, we already tightened the top down, but the bottom needs to go to 66 foot-pounds. Got those two things torqued. Next thing I'm gonna go ahead and torque is 87 foot-pounds, and that's the bracket. I still don't have the suspension loaded to my liking, but I'm going to torque that upper bolt to 87 foot-pounds on both sides. The one that goes through the bracket, the lower control arm relocation bracket, has a sleeve in the middle of it. The last thing I torqued was the panhard rod on the opposite side. So not where we put the relocation here. I don't want to tighten that up because I want the suspension loaded, but the other side has a swivel on it, so we don't have to worry about it. It went to 55 foot-pounds on the opposite side. So we're finished for this video, and here's why. I can't, I mean, I could put the wheels on it and try to set it down. The problem is, without this next part, the rear end's going to tilt and it's not going to set like it's supposed to, and I'm afraid the torque specs will be a little bit out. I just don't want to tighten it up yet until we get this next piece. And that next piece is pretty expensive. It's a torque arm. And so I went back and forth on what torque arm I'm going to go with. I talked about this in a video a while back. I said that I really thought I was going to do a short torque arm, and that's the one that kind of bolts midway through the car, so about halfway toward between where the normal one would mount on the tail shaft of the transmission, which is out, we're not doing that, and right here there's like a flimsy plate that comes from the factory that goes there. I think I am leaning more towards a long torque arm, which means we've got to take the trans mount out because it's all one unit. So the long torque arm basically relocates the torque arm to the outside of the transmission, which we have a tail shaft off a truck, so it's not going to work anyway. I mean, I couldn't put the stock one back on even if I wanted to. So I'm leaning more towards that one because I've just heard some issues with people in like heavy braking, like on the street, where it gets a little loose if you have a short torque arm. The other thing is they're a little quieter than the short torque arm. And ultimately, guys, either one I think probably does a great job. There's a lot of people that went really fast on either one. And we're not building like a super street car, but at the same time, we want to upgrade some stuff while we're in there. But hopefully you guys did enjoy the rear suspension install. Got the rear end painted. Well, I guess we didn't install a ton of rear suspension, but we did get the springs back in. We got the brakes back on. We got everything hooked up for the most part. We need a drive shaft in. We need a torque arm. So hopefully I can get some money together, buy a torque arm, and that will be the next video you see on this thing. But we are really, really close, guys. I am a torque arm, some ground connections, fluids, and a lid, a bass tune away from starting this thing up. We are very, very close. Obviously, there's going to be some alignment and whatnot, some torquing that we need to do on some suspension parts. We need to get on the ground to do that. And then we got to get rid of these black wheels at some point. But if you guys did enjoy this video, please, like always, smash that thumbs up button. If you are not subscribed, go down, hit the subscribe. Of course, like always, ring that bell notification. That will notify you every single time we drop a new video on this or anything else. And stay tuned to see what we do this thing next.